Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Eternals 2021 Movie Review. Eternals is a 2021 American superhero film based on the Marvel Comics race The Eternals. Produced by Marvel Studios and distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures, it is the 26th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU. The film was directed by Chloé Zhao, who wrote the screenplay with Patrick Burley, Ryan Firpo, and Kaz Firpo. It stars an ensemble cast including Gemma Chan, Richard Madden, Kumail Nanjiani, Leah McHugh, Brian Tyree Henry, Lauren Ridloff, Barry Keoghan, Don Lee, Kit Harington, Salma Hayek, and Angelina Jolie. In the film, the Eternals are immortal beings who emerge from hiding after thousands of years to protect Earth from their ancient counterparts, the Deviants. In April 2018, Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige announced that a film based on the Eternals was in development and would explore the group as ancient aliens living throughout human history. Ryan and Kaz Firpo were hired to write the script, and Zhao was set to direct in September. She was given significant creative freedom to rewrite the script, taking particular inspiration from Terrence Malick's films, and to use more locations and natural lighting than previous MCU films had. Casting began in early 2019 and Burley joined to work on the script ahead of principal photography, which took place from July 2019 to February 2020 at Pinewood Studios and on location in England and the Canary Islands. Eternals premiered at the Dolby Theatre in Los Angeles on October 18, 2021, and was released in the United States on November 5 as part of Phase 4 of the MCU. It grossed $402.1 million worldwide and received several awards and nominations, but it also became the first MCU film to not receive generally positive reviews. Particular criticism went to the screenplay and pacing, with commentators feeling it did not live up to Zhao's previous work or to previous MCU films. The themes and visuals received some praise. In 5000 BC, 10 superpowered beings known as Eternals Ajak, Circe, Ikaris, Kingo, Sprite, Phastos, Makari, Druig, Gilgamesh, and Thena are sent to Earth by Arishem, a celestial, on the starship Domo. They are charged with exterminating invasive entities known as the Deviants. After the last Deviants are killed in 1521, the group's opinions differ over their continued relationship with humankind. Over the next 500 years, they mostly live apart, waiting for Arishem's orders. In the present, Circe and Sprite live together in London. After Circe's partner Ikaris left her without explanation centuries earlier, she is now in a relationship with human Dane Whitman who works at the Natural History Museum. When the trio is attacked by the deviant crow, Ikaris arrives and chases the creature away. The three Eternals travel to South Dakota to reunite with their leader, Ajak, only to find her dead. Circe is posthumously chosen by Ajak as her successor, granting her the ability to communicate with Arishem. Circe learns that the Eternals' mission was actually to prepare Earth for the emergence of a new celestial. Arishem explains that, for millions of years, he has been planting celestial seeds inside planets where the energy from large populations allows new celestials to be born. The Deviants were sent to destroy the apex predators of each planet to ensure the development of intelligent life, but when they evolved and began hunting the planet's native populations, Arishem created the Eternals to counter them. With the recent end of the blip restoring Earth's population, humankind has reached the necessary size to allow the celestial Tiamut to be born, which will result in Earth's destruction. Hoping to delay the emergence, the Eternals reunite. At Druig's residence in the Amazon rainforest, they are attacked by the Deviants. They kill them all except for Crow, who kills Gilgamesh before fleeing. Phastos proposes they use the Uni-Mind, a connection between all the Eternals that would give Druig enough power to put Tiamut to sleep with his mind control abilities. However, Ikaris is loyal to Arishem and refuses to help stop the emergence. He reveals that Ajak wanted to stop the emergence and save humanity, so he led her to the Deviants and allowed them to kill her. Sprite joins Ikaris due to her unrequited love for him while Kingo chooses to leave, agreeing with Ikaris but not wanting to hurt his friends. Macquarie locates the site of the emergence, an active volcano in the Indian Ocean, where Ikaris and Sprite attempt to stop them. Druig knocks out Sprite, and Phosphos restrains Ikaris. Crow arrives and is killed by Thena. Druig is unable to put Tiamut to sleep, and Cersei instead attempts to turn him into stone. Ikaris breaks free of his restraints and goes to kill Cersei, but is unable to due to his love for her. Both he and Sprite join with the others in the Uni-Mind, and Cersei gains enough power to turn Tiamut into stone. Guilt-ridden, Ikaris flies into the sun. Cersei uses the remaining Uni-Mind energy to turn Sprite into a human, ending her permanent childlike state. Thena, Druig, and Macquarie depart on the Domo to warn Eternals on other planets of the Emergence. Whitman professes his love for Cersei and is about to reveal a secret about his family history when she, Phosphos, and King O are lifted into space by Arishem. Displeased with their treason, Arishem says he will spare humanity if the Eternals' memories show that humans are worthy of living. He vows to return for judgment and takes the trio into a singularity. In a mid-credits scene, Thena, Macquarie, and Druig meet the Eternal Eros and his assistant Pip the Troll. In a post-credits scene, an unseen person questions whether Whitman is ready to wield the ebony blade. In April 2015, Marvel Television was working with screenwriter John Ridley to craft a new television series for ABC, reinventing an existing Marvel Comics character or property. This was revealed years later to be the Eternals, a race of long-lived superheroes created by Jack Kirby. Ridley said he was trying to make a superhero series that viewers had not seen before, differentiating it from Marvel's other projects, and said his approach would have been a really weird story that may not have been entertaining for everyone. It ultimately did not move forward with Ridley, and Marvel Television was folded into Marvel Studios in December 2019. Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige said in April 2018 that the studio was actively developing a film based on the Eternals, to be released as part of their Marvel Cinematic Universe, MCU, Phase 4 slate of films. Marvel Studios had met with multiple screenwriters and was believed to be focusing on the character Cersei in the film. Marvel set Ryan and Kaz Firpo to write the script a month later, with their outline including a love story between the characters Cersei and Ikaris. The Firpo said the 1999 limited comic book series Earth X by Jim Krueger and John Paul Leon, which is about a dystopian version of the Marvel Universe, was a major inspiration for them. In June, Feige said Marvel was interested in exploring the ancient aliens kind of sci-fi trope by having the Eternals be the inspiration for myths and legends throughout the history of the MCU. During late August, Marvel's director search for Eternals narrowed to a short list that included Chloé Zhao, who had also been in the running to direct Marvel's Black Widow, 2021, Nicole Kassell, Travis Knight, and the pair of Cristina Gallego and Ciro Guerra. Zhao approached Marvel Studios about making the film as she had been a fan of the MCU. She wanted to work with the studio to bring her own take and world building to the franchise and impress them with a presentation that Feige described as fascinating, with reams of visuals. Feige was also impressed with Zhao's passion for the project, since it was not a top priority for the studio. Zhao worked with producer Nate Moore to develop her pitch, noting she became interested in the project after reading its treatment that read like a Greek play where gods get to discuss everything about human nature based on their own relationship. The presentation left Marvel concerned that she might take on a different big studio project instead of Eternals, forcing them to move quickly to secure her, and Zhao was hired as director in September. This was ahead of her beginning production on her film Nomadland, 2020, with Zhao beginning to work on the Eternals script during the filming of Nomadland. 38 Zhao hoped to push the scope of the film further than Marvel's Avengers, Endgame, 2019, but also wanted it to have intimacy. 41 Zhao described the film as a melting pot of influences, taking from Kirby's original Eternals comics, Neil Gaiman's 2006 comic book run previous MCU projects, and Zhao's love of science fiction and fantasy films and manga. Speaking specifically to her love of manga, she hoped those influences would create a marriage of East and West. Zhao cited the television series Ancient Aliens, 2009, present, the Final Fantasy video game franchise, concepts from Yuval Noah Harari's book Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, 2011, and the films of Terrence Malick as inspirations. Marvel saw Eternals as an opportunity to create an ensemble film that is not a crossover, similar to Guardians of the Galaxy, 2014, and to introduce relatively unknown characters to audiences as they did with the Guardians and the Avengers. The studio also considered Eternals to be a perfect transition into its next phase of films, along with projects such as Captain Marvel, 2019, allowing them to cast a diverse group of actors to portray the various Eternals. Moore's initial planning documents for the project included the swapping of genders, sexualities, and ethnicities of some characters, and Zhao further advocated for this approach. In February 2019, Feige reiterated that Marvel was interested in the Eternals due to Kirby's epic, century-spanning story, with the film version covering 7,000 years and exploring humanity's place in the cosmos. Zhao said, "The Eternals have lived among us for so long, they have the same struggles like identity, purpose, faith, personal freedom versus greater good, all the duality and flaws that make us human. With a story that spans so many years, the characters' relationships evolve like a complex family unit where friends turn into frenemies, and then turn into enemies, and then come back to friendship." Zhao considered the Earth to be an 11th character in the film. Zhao continued working on a draft of the script throughout early 2019, which built upon the multiple drafts submitted by the Firpos. Approximately 4 months ahead of filming, the script was not finalized. Moore introduced Zhao to Patrick Burley, who had been part of Marvel's writers program, in the hopes that Burley could assist with the writing. Zhao hired him to work on the screenplay, which he did for about 3 months ahead of filming. Burley believed Zhao needed to write on the film as well as direct to process the film through her own filter, and said her draft showed that she was trying to make the Terrence Malick version of a Marvel film. Zhao cited Malick's film The Tree of Life, 2011, as a particular inspiration. Burley said his work on the script was mostly structural to find the flow of the film, and likened the story to a road trip film. Angelina Jolie joined the cast in March 2019, reportedly as Cersei, with Kumail Nanjiani and Don Lee cast in undisclosed roles the next month. At that time, the film was expected to feature Marvel Studios' first gay superhero. In May, Richard Madden entered negotiations for the role of Icarus, and Salma Hayek had entered early negotiations for an undisclosed role the following month. In July, Variety reported that the cast included Jolie, Madden, and Millie Bobby Brown, but Brown denied that she had been cast. At the 2019 San Diego Comic-Con, Feige officially announced The Eternals with a release date of November 6, 2020. He officially announced the casting of Jolie as Thena, Nanjiani as Kingo, Lee as Gilgamesh, Madden as Icarus, and Hayek as Ajak, along with Lauren Ridloff as Macquarie, Brian Tyree Henry as Phastos, and Leah McHugh as Sprite. Zhao looked for actors for each role that could find a bit of themselves in their character. Feige added that one of these actors was portraying an LGBTQ character, with actor Has Slayman later revealing that Phastos is depicted as gay in the film. Slayman portrays the character's husband, and the pair have a child in the film. Slayman felt it was important to depict how loving and beautiful a queer family can be rather than the sexual or rebellious depiction in some previous media. Feige said the relationship was always sort of inherent in the story and he felt it was extremely well done in the film, while Slayman said it was a thoughtful depiction. Eternals is set around 8 months after the events of Avengers: Endgame, and addresses why the Eternals did not interfere in any previous conflicts in the MCU. Both Feige and Moore said the film would have major ripple effects on the future of the MCU, and at times, it was a challenge to balance the grounded nature of the MCU with the mythic grandeur of the Eternals property. By the time of the film's official announcement in July 2019, principal photography had begun at Pinewood Studios in Buckinghamshire, England. Ben Davis served as director of photography, after doing so on several previous MCU films. Zhao said Marvel Studios allowed her creative freedom to shoot the film on location, exactly the way she wanted to shoot it. She was able to use a similar style to her previous films, including 360 degrees shots and working with the same camera and rigs as were used for her film Nomadland, 2020, which Zhao was set to complete back-to-back with Eternals. Zhao felt that she got lucky in that Marvel wants to take risks and do something different. Zhao cited The Revenant, 2015, as a primary influence when composing the film's action sequences. Gemma Chan and Barry Keoghan were in talks to join the cast in August 2019. Chan previously portrayed Minerva in Captain Marvel, but reports noted that she was potentially being looked at by Marvel to play a separate character in this film. 61 Since Minerva dies in that film, Chan had felt that it was unlikely she would return to the MCU, but after working on the film she was told by Feige that the studio wanted to make better use of her in a future project. This led to Chan auditioning for Cersei, one of the last actresses to be considered for the role. Chan later described Cersei as the most difficult role for the film to cast. Chan and Keoghan were confirmed to be cast in the film at the D23 Expo in August, in the roles of Cersei and Druig, respectively, along with Kit Harington as Dane Whitman. Chan said she and Marvel Studios were surprised by how soon after Captain Marvel her new MCU role came, with both assuming that it would have been a project further in the future. Harish Patel was cast at the end of August as Karun, King O's manager, and filmed his role from September 2019 until January 2020. By early November, filming had taken place in the Canary Islands. The cast and crew, including Jolie and Madden, had to be evacuated from a shooting location on the island of Fuerteventura when an explosive device, thought to be a remnant armament from a Nazi base, was found there. Later that month, Zain al-Rafia joined the cast. In early January 2020, filming took place outside the Oxford University Museum of Natural History in Oxford, England, as well as Hampstead Heath and in Camden in London, under the working title Sack Lunch. Chan said the filming process felt very different from what she experienced on Captain Marvel, explaining that Eternals shot more on location and used natural light while Captain Marvel had more studio work and blue screens. Filming wrapped on February 4, 2020. In March 2020, Scanline VFX, one of the companies working on the film's visual effects, confirmed that they would be working remotely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Industrial Light and Magic, Luma Pictures, Rise, and Weta Digital also worked on the film's visual effects. In early April, Disney shifted much of their Phase 4 slate of films due to the pandemic, moving the Eternals release date to February 12, 2021. In August, the film's title was officially shortened from The Eternals to Eternals, and the next month, the release date was pushed back to November 5, 2021. Reshoots had taken place by mid-November 2020. Additional filming occurred in Los Angeles in early February, also under the working title Sack Lunch. Dylan Titchener and Craig would serve as co-editors of the film. Titchener said Zhao usually edits her own films and has strong opinions, but on Eternals she was relying on Titchener and would due to the size of the production and the ongoing awards season for Nomadland. Titchener added that Zhao respected the pair's editing experience and point of view, and they made their first cut of the film without much input from her. They began adjusting the film based on Zhao's feedback and were still working on the editing in April 2021. At the end of the month, Zhao said editing for the film was in its final stretch, and Jashoun St. John was revealed to appear in the film, after previously starring in Zhao's film Songs My Brothers Taught Me, 2015. At the end of May 2021, with the release of the first teaser trailer and poster for the film, the official writing credits were revealed. Zhao was credited as the screenwriter, both as a solo contributor and as part of a writing team with Burley, while Ryan and Kaz Firpo received story credit. Additionally, Gil Birmingham was revealed to have been cast in the film although he was absent in the final film. Citation needed. In July 2021, Writers Guild of America West presented the film's final writing credits, awarding Ryan and Kaz Firpo screenplay credit along with Zhao and the team of Zhao and Burley, in addition to their story credit. Moore believed the studio had bit off as much as we could chew with the film, creating one that felt urgent and present and had a fast pace, but also took time to reflect back over the centuries. At the film's world premiere, Matt Donnelly of Variety tweeted that Harry Styles made an appearance in a post-credits scene as Arrow/Star Fox, Thanos' brother in the comics, which was not shown in early press screenings of the film. Zhao later revealed that she kept tabs on Styles since his appearance in the film Dunkirk, 2017, believing that he makes me think of Eros as a character. WWE wrestler Becky Lynch had a role in the film for a planned post-credits scene that was intended to set up a future project. The scene was removed for being reportedly too depressing. Ramin Djawadi composed the score for the film, after previously doing so for Marvel's Iron Man, 2008. Two songs from the film's soundtrack, Across the Oceans of Time and Eternals theme, were released as singles on October 22, 2021, while the full album was released on November 3. The first footage of the film was released in May 2021, as part of a promotional video from Marvel Studios celebrating their films and a return to theaters in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Though the footage was limited and vague, Howie Tranbui at /Film still felt it was very exciting. Chaim Gartenberg of The Verge felt one of the biggest moments of the footage was seeing Jolie wielding a sword made of light. He was also encouraged that Eternals appeared to be one of Marvel's first films to deliver on their years-long promise of creating films with more diverse casts. Nerdist's Michael Arbiter said the footage was quick, but felt that it manages an air of wonderment. The first teaser for the film was released on May 24, 2021. Gartenberg felt the teaser was light on plot elements, with it instead focusing on the civilization-spanning scope of the superhero team and its members throughout human history. He also believed the film was a big swing from Marvel Studios to entice audiences with a lesser-known comics property, but believed that it would succeed due to its diverse cast of well-known actors and Zhao's status as one of the most exciting directors around. IO9's Charlie's Polium Moore felt the trailer was a multiple millennia-spanning recap of Earth's history, and said it was unclear how much the larger MCU would impact on the film outside of a brief reference to the Avengers at the end of the trailer. Writing for Entertainment Weekly, Nick Romano felt the teaser was a combination of thrilling, goosebump-inducing moments and some jokes. Eric Adams of the AV Club felt the spot teased some fresh angles for the MCU in a similar way to Thor, Ragnarok, 2017, and Guardians of the Galaxy, 2014, and he enjoyed the images of King O's Bollywood dance, Sprite performing karaoke, and the end scene of the Eternals eating together and joking about the Avengers. After seeing the teaser, Variety's Adam B. Very described the film as unquestionably a Chloé Zhao movie, but wished more action set pieces were featured in the teaser to see how Zhao would approach them in the film. One Adele Anchors of IGN discussed the poster that was released at the same time as the trailer, highlighting how the Eternals appear in silhouette against a sunlit background, which she described as another taste of Chloé Zhao's signature filming style and the use of natural light to illuminate a frame that would be seen in the film. Upon release, the teaser quickly became the #1 trending video on YouTube and amassed 77 million global views in its first 24 hours. Disney's president of marketing Asad Ayaz said the teaser was designed to just be an introduction to the characters and tone and not give much of the film away, adding the marketing team would be very judicious on when more material would be revealed, while also using the releases of Black Widow and Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings before Eternals to help expose audiences to the characters. The final trailer was released in August 2021, with Ethan Schanfeld and Minoru Ravindran of Variety feeling it was more serious in tone than the teaser, with the Eternals grappling with the prospect of emerging after centuries living apart in order to help humans. Entertainment Weekly's Devin Cogan felt that the trailer was the best glimpse yet of the film and gave a sense of the vast scale and scope of the film, while answering one important question about the absence of the Eternals during the conflict against Thanos in Avengers, Infinity War and Avengers, Endgame. Aaron Couch at The Hollywood Reporter said the trailer reveals much of the film's plot as well as its characters' powers, teasing the answers to key questions about who the Eternals answer to, their relationship to Earth and why they ultimately didn't intervene in the conflict against Thanos. In October 2021, Lexus released a commercial promoting the film and its Lexus IS 500 sports sedan starring Nanjiani as King O, with frequent MCU directors Zhao and Anthony Russo guiding its development and Framestore working on the visual effects. Lexus created 10 concept cars based on the 10 Eternals characters from the film. The LS 500H and NX are featured in the film. Beginning on November 20, 2021, select costumes from the film were part of the Futures exhibit at the Smithsonian Institution's Arts and Industries building, which ran through July 2022. Behind-the-scenes content looking at the evolution of the film's visuals as well as an augmented reality experience were also included in the exhibit. Eternals had its world premiere at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood, Los Angeles, on October 18, 2021, and was screened at the Rome Film Festival on October 24. The film was released theatrically in many European countries on November 3, and in the United States and the United Kingdom on November 5 in RealD 3D and 4DX. In September 2021, Disney announced that the film would have an exclusive theatrical release for a minimum of 45 days. Eternals was previously set for release on November 6, 2020, before it was shifted to February 12, 2021, and then to the November 2021 date, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is part of Phase 4 of the MCU. In May 2021, a Chinese state media report excluded Eternals, as well as Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, from its list of upcoming MCU films releasing, which Variety noted added to rumors that the films would not be released in China, especially since Zhao had become an unexpected persona non grata in the country after she was scrutinized by Chinese netizens over her remarks in a 2013 interview with Filmmaker magazine in which she described China as a place where there are lies everywhere. By September 2021, Deadline Hollywood reported it remained an open question if the Chinese government or Zhao would attempt to rehabilitate the situation, but it seems likely the film would not be released in China following the country's response to Nomadland, as well as Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings likely not being released in the country either, following backlash to comments made by star Simulu in 2017. Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman due to the depiction of a gay couple. Theaters in the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt were set to show an edited version of the film which is missing all the love scenes. Angelina Jolie criticized the country's decision to ban the film, saying, "I'm sad for those audiences. And I'm proud of Marvel for refusing to cut those scenes out. I still don't understand how we live in a world today where there's still people who would not see the family Fastos has and the beauty of that relationship and that love. How anybody is angry about it, threatened by it, doesn't approve or appreciate it is ignorant." Lebanese actor Hasley Iman, who played Fausto's husband Ben in the film, also voiced the same reaction towards the matter. They stood their ground and said, "Nope, we are not going to compromise the integrity of our film. It made these Arab countries look sick, so ignorant and pathetic. I have no respect for those governments. They have displayed to the world that they are not only a disgrace to humanity, but to God. Hopefully this will inspire the Saudi people, the Kuwaiti people and the people in Qatar to fight back." Marvel later agreed to cut any kind of love scenes, including the gay couple kiss, for the film's release in Indonesia, which received praise from the Indonesian Film Censorship Board, LSF. Eternals began streaming on Disney Plus on January 12, 2022, with the option to view the theatrical version of the film or an IMAX enhanced version. Audio commentary and additional bonus features for the film were added to Disney Plus in March 2022. It was released on Ultra HD Blu-ray, and DVD on February 15. The home media includes audio commentary, deleted scenes, a gag reel, and various behind-the-scenes featurettes. In the United States, Eternals debuted at number 4 on iTunes in transactions, number 5 on Google Play, and number 3 on Vudu, which ranks titles by revenue, for the week of January 10th to 17th. The film debuted at number 1 on both the overall disc sales chart and the Blu-ray disc chart for the week ending February 19th. Blu-ray formats accounted for 67% of first week sales, with 37% from standard Blu-ray and 30% from 4K Ultra HD editions. The film remained the number 1 best-selling DVD and Blu-ray for the second consecutive week on both charts for the week ending February 26th, while also debuting at number 4 on the rental chart following a one-week delay in availability at Redbox kiosks. Blu-ray formats accounted for 67% of the film's first week disc sales, with 37% from standard Blu-ray and 30% from 4K Ultra HD. For the month of April 2022, Eternals ranked number 8 on the year-to-date disc sales chart, according to Circana. Analytics company Samba TV, which gathers viewership data from certain smart TVs and content providers, reported that Eternals was watched by 2 million US households during its first 5 days on Disney+. Whip Media, which tracks viewership data for the more than 25 million worldwide users of its TV Time app, calculated that it was the top streaming film for viewers in the US for the week ending January 16th. Nielsen Media Research, which records streaming viewership on certain US television screens, announced that Eternals was streamed for 4.24 billion minutes in 2022, ranking as the 13th most streamed film of the year. Eternals was the most streamed Marvel film of 2022, making it both the first MCU and first superhero film to appear on the annual list. Eternals grossed $164.9 million in the United States and Canada, and $237.2 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $402.1 million. The film's opening weekend earned $162 million globally, which was the second largest worldwide opening weekend in the COVID-19 pandemic for a Hollywood film, of which IMAX contributed to over $13.6 million. Advanced ticket sales for Eternals were estimated to be $2.6 million in its first 24 hours, outpacing those for Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, $1.4 million, and Black Widow, $2 million, during the same time frame, while AMC Theaters had the largest first-day sales of 2021 for the film. In November, Fandango reported that pre-sales for Eternals were the second largest of 2021, behind Black Widow. In October, Box Office Pro initially projected that the film would earn $82 to $102 million within its opening weekend, and around $210 to $280 million in total domestic box office. At the end of the month, Box Office Pro modified their projections to $67 to $92 million for the film's opening weekend, and around $165 to $215 million in total domestic box office, due to mixed early critical reception. According to Deadline Hollywood, Eternals was expected to earn $75 million within its domestic opening weekend, and around $150 million globally. In the United States and Canada, Eternals earned $30.7 million on its opening day, which included $9.5 million from Thursday night previews, marking the third largest opening day of the pandemic, behind Black Widow and Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Its opening weekend earned $71.3 million from 5.5 million theater admissions, making it the top film of the weekend. IMAX accounted for over $7.6 million over the weekend. This marked the fourth largest opening weekend of the pandemic. The domestic opening weekend gross was lower than various pre-release projections. Deadline attributed this to the film's overall mixed reception from critics and audiences. In its second weekend, Eternals remained the top film, grossing over $27.50 million. Eternals became the sixth highest grossing film of 2021 in the United States. Outside of North America, Eternals earned over $90.7 million within its opening weekend from 46 markets. It was number one in nearly all of these markets. The international opening weekend gross had exceeded various pre-release projections. IMAX contributed to $6 million of the opening gross, from 58 countries. The film scored the largest opening of the pandemic in Italy, Brazil, and Hong Kong. In South Korea, Eternals earned $14.4 million, marking the largest debut for a Hollywood film amid the pandemic. In Russia, the film earned an opening of $5.4 million through 6 days. In its second weekend, Eternals earned $48 million from 49 markets, a drop of 49%. It remained number one in many of these territories. The following weekend, the film earned $22.7 million. It was the top film of the weekend internationally, remaining the top film in many territories, including all markets across Latin America, except for Mexico. As of November 28, 2021, the film's largest markets were South Korea, $26.4 million, the United Kingdom, $18.7 million, France, $14.9 million, Mexico, $14.3 million, and Brazil, $11.1 million. The review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes reports an approval rating of 47% based on 417 reviews, with an average rating of 5.7/10. The website's critical consensus reads, "An ambitious superhero epic that soars as often as it strains, Eternals takes the MCU in intriguing and occasionally confounding new directions." On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 52 out of 100, based on 62 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Upon release, it became the lowest rated MCU film on both websites and the first installment to be classified as rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B on an A+ to F scale, the lowest grade for an MCU film at the time of its release, and Post-Track reported 78% of audience members gave it a positive score, with 60% saying they would definitely recommend it. Charlotte O'Sullivan of the Evening Standard described the film as lavish and ambitious, and praised the fight sequences as astounding, beautifully paced, and crammed with detail. Robert Abeel of The Wrap commended the cinematography and felt an earnestness to the operatic stakes. Oliver Jones of The Observer called it full of wonder and romance and fueled by an agenda and audacity all its own. Owen Gleiberman was disappointed over Zhao's missing filmmaking style that shaped her films The Rider, 2017, and Nomadland, 2020, to embrace the straight-up expository conventionality of Marvel filmmaking, but felt that the film was a squarely fun and gratifying watch. Moira MacDonald of the Seattle Times thought it's got some pretty slow spots mid-film and it's desperately in need of a bit more wit. What it does have is a palpable, artful mood. This is a movie full of superheroes who spend time thinking and feeling, and of special effects that aren't just zippy but often delicately elegant. Linda Marek of the Jewish Chronicle described it as a mishmash of well-meaning, yet jarringly verbose and bafflingly incoherent nonsense which is only just about saved by some half-decent performances. Nicholas Barber of BBC Culture called Zhao's direction workmanlike, and Clarice Luffrey of The Independent said that it strives for the same expansive soulfulness as Nomadland but discovers there's room enough only for the occasional burst of it. Brian Truitt of USA Today praised Zhao's penchant for naturalistic environments, but wrote that the narrative struggles to juggle its many subplots and tries to do too much. Mark Kennedy of the Associated Press criticized the dialogue and fight scenes, but praised the visual effects and Nanjiani's performance. Shirley Lee of The Atlantic felt that Zhao's delicate examination of her characters outshines Eternal's duller and more convoluted moments. Robbie Collin wrote the film was constantly engaged in a kind of grit-toothed authenticity theater, going out of its way to show you it's doing all the things proper cinema does, even though none of them bring any discernible benefit. Kevin Marr felt a strange self-sabotaging energy at the heart, and Steve Rose of The Guardian missed the breezy wit of Marvel's best movies, like coming into Avengers Endgame cold without having seen any of the preceding installments. K. Austin Collins of Rolling Stone felt that the film was good at telling us where to look, at impressing us with its manufactured sense of grandeur, but lacked any credible sense of what's actually worth seeing. Justin Chang of the Los Angeles Times had a depressing realization that you've just seen one of the more interesting movies Marvel will ever make, and hopefully the least interesting one Chloé Zhao will ever make. Brian Lowry of CNN thought the movie's structural flaws offset its stunning visuals and strong performances. Kyle Smith of National Review was harsher, describing it as one of the dumbest, cheesiest, most trite, and least human of the MCU films. The mixed reception surprised some commentators, given the MCU's positive track record and the acclaim of Zhao's previous work. Richard Newby of The Hollywood Reporter wrote that much of the criticism of Kirby's work, which was divisive for its subject matter and relationship to the wider Marvel Universe, has followed Zhao in her adaptation. He compared the divided response to that of Zack Snyder's DC Extended Universe, DCEU, films Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, 2016, writing that they and Eternals share a deconstructive approach to superheroes and force them to question their purpose in the world, through meditative and melancholy narrative beats, and a tragic yet hopeful ending. This approach, he felt, subverted critics' and audiences' expectations, which made them review the film more harshly. Zhao addressed some of the criticisms of the film, believing some of the division came from everyone having an existential crisis because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the film being an existential crisis, both for humanity and God. She also felt the reactions to how the film incorporated her filmmaking sensibilities with Marvel's were a testament to how much we had merged with each other, how uncomfortable that might make people feel. The film was given the seal of authentic representation from the Ruderman Family Foundation for Ridloff's role as Macquarie. The seal is given to films and series that feature actors with disabilities who have at least 5 lines of dialogue. Eternals was also one of 28 films that received the Reframe stamp for 2021, awarded by the Gender Equity Coalition. Reframe for films that are proven to have gender-balanced hiring. In October 2021, Zhao said she was open to making a sequel. The next month, Kaz and Ryan Firpo expressed interest in making a prequel series for Disney Plus that would focus on one Eternal in a different time period each episode, such as an episode about Athena in ancient Greece and one about Kingo in 1890s Mumbai, where he balances his life as a film star with Mahatma Gandhi's campaign for India's independence from British rule. They also felt there were opportunities to continue the film's story by further exploring Dane Whitman and showing the Eternals confronting the Celestials. Chan said in January 2022 that she would reprise the role of Cersei in the future. Feige was asked about Styles' future in the MCU that July and said Marvel Studios was excited to further explore the characters Eros and Pip as part of the MCU's more cosmic stories. A month later, Oswald said a sequel had been confirmed by Marvel Studios and Zhao was returning to direct. He hoped it would further explore Eros and Pip, and expressed interest in a spin-off film for the characters. In October, Moore said Marvel intended to bring back the Eternals characters in the future of the MCU. Nanjiani said the following month that he was unaware of a sequel and believed Oswald was mistaken, but expressed interest in reprising his role as Kingo. Don Lee's talent agency indicated in December that he would reprise his role as Gilgamesh in an Eternals sequel. Oswald clarified his statements in February 2023, saying a sequel was not in development at that time and that he had been misled. 193 In July 2024, Feige said there were no plans for a sequel at the time. 194 In August 2025, Nanjiani said the film's poor reception shattered him and tempered his expectations of reprising the role for the next 10 years. Eternals is a Marvel superhero story about a group of 10 powerful, immortal beings sent to Earth to protect humanity 7,000 years ago, but who are faced with a new challenge that could destroy all of humanity, the people they've come to love. Eternals is a rousing, epic superhero adventure laced with humor and excellent character development, with some moral, redemptive elements, but the movie has some expository moments and static dialogue, a homosexual subplot, some foul language, a brief sex scene, and a false, unacceptable pagan mythology that erases God from creation and human history. The movie opens with a written prologue which claims that a giant celestial named Arishem created the heavens and the earth and created light. He also created a race of super beings called Eternals to help him rule the universe, but a race of monsters called Deviants started to destroy whole planets. So, 7,000 years ago, he sent some Eternals to protect the people of Earth from the Deviants. Cut to 10 Eternals, led by a female named Ajak, defending some Neolithic people from the Deviants. The Eternals start living among the people of Earth. In ancient Babylon, they defeat the last of the Deviants. Also, 2 of the Eternals, Circe and the powerful Icarus, fall in love. They eventually get married in 400 AD in a pagan ceremony in the Gupta Empire in India. However, during the destruction of the capital city of the Aztec Empire in 1521, the Eternals become disturbed by the inhumanity of man to man. Ajak, their leader, orders them not to interfere, however, because that's their mandate from Arishem. This creates a rift among them, and they split up, including Circe and Icarus. In present-day London, 3 of the Eternals, including Circe, must battle a deviant monster who suddenly appears. Circe and her long-lost husband, Icarus, decide they must gather together the other Eternals and battle this new threat. However, an even bigger, apocalyptic threat to humanity appears and pits the Eternals against one another. In the original Marvel Comics version of the Celestials and the Eternals created in the 1970s, the first universe was depicted as a conscious entity who created 2 kinds of celestial servants, the aspirants and the Celestials. However, a war broke out between them, and the Celestials used a bomb to tear apart the first universe and conquer the aspirants. A multiverse was created by the explosion. Then the Celestials created an evolutionary offshoot of humans with fantastic powers called Eternals. The Eternals were charged with looking after the rest of humanity and protecting them from a race of intergalactic monsters called Deviants. Eventually, however, Marvel created in 2004 a distant god character and divine creator called the One Above All. This character is the source of all love and good and the power behind the creation of the first universe and the multiverse. He stays aloof from the world and only acts through another cosmic superbeing he created called the Living Tribunal, who judges all the universes and beings in the multiverse. However, the One Above All is a dual god, similar to the Zoroastrian god. He also manifests himself as the One Below All, the ultimate personification of hate, chaos, and destruction. In a series of comics starting in 2002, Marvel created a version of the God of the Bible, Yahweh, but Marvel depicts Yahweh as comically denying having anything to do with the Hebrew Scriptures or the New Testament, though he manifests himself as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Marvel also depicts Yahweh as having a drinking problem and suffering from personality disorder, as well as suffering anger tantrums. Marvel's Eternals movie simplifies all this by turning the celestial character, Arishem, into a kind of supreme being. It thus, apparently, totally eliminates the need for the One Above All, much less the God of the Bible. Eventually, though, Arishem comes across as a less than benevolent supreme being in the movie, though he orders the Eternals to take care of the humans who populate Earth. Eternals is beautifully photographed and has an epic quality to it. The action, especially in the third act, is often rousing and exciting and leads to a satisfying conclusion. Also, the character development is rather detailed and often dramatically compelling. That said, the story goes back and forth in time and consequently contains a lot of exposition. As a result, some of the dialogue scenes are a bit static, especially because the director shoots some of them in close-up, in a painterly manner. Also, many of the action scenes show the superheroes fighting faceless CGI monsters, which is kind of old hat by now. The most disappointing aspect of Eternals, however, is its false pagan mythology. For the first time in its superhero movies, Marvel has decided to totally eliminate the God of the Bible, including Jesus, from creation and human history. At least in the comic books, there's an ultimate supreme being who creates the Celestials. In this light, Eternals has a major philosophical problem. The movie talks a lot about the love for people that some of the superheroes have. Indeed, it is this love for people, as well as the love the superheroes have for one another, that ultimately saves the day during the movie's climactic battle in the third act. However, unless you have an ultimate divine source, a personal and benevolent supreme being, or God, for such love, then the idea of love from one lesser being to another lesser being has no ultimate, transcendent foundation. At the end of the movie, Cersei says she became a better person because of her interaction with the goodness of the human race down through the centuries, but where do the human beings derive this goodness, since they are, like the Eternals, created beings? Arishem, the supreme being in this movie, is clearly a poor substitute for the God of the Bible. But according to this story, Earth, and pert near every other planet, was the work of massive alien beings known as the Celestials. Alas, the planetary crust had barely cooled before their creations were soured by nefarious deep space creatures dubbed deviants. Those deviants were a ravenous bunch, so nasty and, for the most part, toothy that they threatened to devour everything the Celestials had created. The Celestials were too busy floating in the void of space to take direct action. So clearly, some galactic police were needed to safeguard creation. So the Celestials made the Eternals mega-powered beings with your typical super array of physics-bending talents to protect their precious planets and fight the deviants. And those Eternals were a spiritualized bunch, given strict instructions to not muck around in planetary affairs unless a deviant was involved. But here's the thing, if you're an Eternal, you're eventually going to run out of deviants to fight. That's what happened on Earth. The planet's collection of Eternals had done a super great job battling their natural foes. They ignored wars and famines and all manner of woes to exterminate the planet's deviants. By around the year 1500 or so, there were no deviants left. And then things got a little depressing. A couple of Eternals wondered why, with so much time on their hands, being eternal and all, they couldn't help the planet in other ways. One or two openly questioned their leader, Ajak. And since YouTube hadn't been invented yet, the Eternals began to bicker a bit over how to keep themselves busy. Ajak told them nicely to just take off. Their jobs were done. Why not spend a few centuries living normal lives? And so they went their own ways, each to live as he or she thought was best. Cersei, the crew's expert matter manipulator, wound up in London, living in a flat with fellow Eternal, and Eternal 11-year-old, Sprite, because London flats are apparently that expensive. She snagged herself a boyfriend, a fellow named Dane Whitman, who had no clue that she was almost certain to outlive him. She lectured at the Natural History Museum and diddled on her phone. She looked at her life and thought, yes, it was good. But no one told the earthbound deviants that they were supposed to be extinct. One lovely London evening, Cersei and Sprite spot a couple of deviants wreaking havoc on a city street and with a hankering for a little Eternal gumbo. The two fight the things, but the battle could have gotten out of hand had not another Eternal Icarus literally flown into town at that very moment. As the strongest Eternal, Icarus completes the deviant beatdown and says hello to Cersei and Sprite, whom he'd not seen for 500 years or so. But clearly, these Eternals have more on their plates than uncomfortable reunions. Where did those deviants come from, anyway? The Eternals sometimes call themselves a family, and they do seem, for the most part, to care for one another. And there's no better illustration of that connection than the relationship between Gilgamesh and Thena. Both are strong warriors. But, alas, Thena is apparently going crazy, which makes her pretty dangerous. It's something, Leader Ajak tells us, that happens to many Eternals after a while. The only way to cure it is to wipe Thena's cerebral hard drive and start fresh. But Thena doesn't want to forget, and Ajak promises to take care of her, which he does for centuries. Thena also says one of the movie's more poignant lines, "When you love something, you protect it," she says, thinking perhaps of Gilgamesh's protective care, but also of the Eternals' centuries of work. It's the most natural thing in the world. Turns out, To protect Earth, something that most of the Eternals have come to love, will require untold, and unexpected, sacrifices. And many of these super beings are willing to make them. We could spend the rest of the review unpacking Eternals' incredibly messy spirituality. And caution, there will be some possible spoilers in this section. The movie is telling its own myths and weaving, if you will, its own religion, one that contains elements of ancient pagan beliefs and Eastern philosophy, but that still is very much its own thing. And if we try to overlay Christianity on top of the creation/destruction myths of Eternals to see if we can find some sort of Christian meaning in it all, we're in for some disappointment. If we make the Celestials, especially the Celestial Prime, Arishem, analogous to God, that would make the Eternals their angels, and rebellious ones at that. Turns out, what Arishem and many of the Eternals differ on what is the right thing to do, cosmically speaking. Now, Christians know what became of angels that rebelled against their creator, and it wasn't good. But perhaps the movie's Celestials aren't worthy of obedience. We go back to Thena's statement that we should protect the things we love. Without getting into the details, the Celestials aren't really about protecting their creations, rather, those creations are a means to an end. That's very out of character with the God that we know. The Eternals, then, are probably more analogous to Prometheus, a Grecian god/hero that gave the gift of fire to humanity against the god's wishes than Lucifer. Eternals takes plenty of cues from classic paganism and ancient myth. Gilgamesh takes his name from an ancient Sumerian hero. Circe, Icarus and Athena all stem from Greek gods and heroes, and Athena is repeatedly name-checked as the Greek goddess of war. The names and, in some cases, the abilities of Macquarie, Ajak, and Phostos, characters we've not gotten to in this review, also can be traced back to Greek story and mythology. While one Eternal reminds another that he is not literally a god, it's suggested that the Eternals are the basis for the myths and devotion that sprang up around them. Despite all this spiritualism, the film seems to do its best to distance itself from any breath of Judaism and Christianity. We hear a snarky reference to Noah's Ark, and a character does paraphrase scripture, saying the truth will set them free. And one Eternal does buzz by Rio de Janeiro's famous Christ the Redeemer statue. Instead, the story seems to lean more into Hinduism. Two characters get married in what appears to be a Hindu ceremony, while a funeral rite is presided over by an Indian mortal. And the themes of the cycle of creation and destruction, big themes in Hinduism, and other faith systems, undergirds much of the film. The only currently married couple we meet here is a same-sex couple, Phostos and his human mate, who are raising a son in Chicago. We see the two share a lingering goodbye kiss and hear a great deal about how much they love each other. Both are clearly dutiful fathers. Though Marvel has had other nods to LGBT characters, this is the first gay relationship that the MCU has depicted on screen. We have a few other couples to make note of here, too. Circe and Icarus are the most notable. They, too, got hitched, in the aforementioned Hindu ceremony, but that comes literally centuries after the two have sex for the first time, which, in a first for a Marvel movie, we see on screen. It's not R-rated, of course, but we do see them partly disrobe and lay down on some rock/sand as the camera films them from the shoulders up, engaged in a bit of movement. While Icarus and Circe didn't officially divorce, Icarus did mysteriously take off for 500 years, enough, you would think, for a common-law divorce, and Circe found a new lover in Dane Whitman. The couple kisses and flirts as well, and Dane's put off by the fact that Circe refuses to move in with him. Two other Eternals, Macquarie and Druig, appear to be a couple, too, and we see them engaged in flirty behavior. Sprite, who's eternally 11, has a crush on another Eternal, and she's pretty frustrated that her age makes it impossible for her to be with him. She's an illusionist, and she turns herself into a young adult woman at a nightclub to flirt with an unsuspecting mortal. Women sometimes dress in ever so slightly revealing garb, and most of the Eternals' outfits are skin-tight. The movie has plenty of the violence we'd expect in superhero flicks, so I won't belabor that too much. But this is an important note: despite their moniker, a few Eternals die here. One particularly bright deviant can suck the life literally out of them. Through a bevy of organic tubes he stabs into them, leaving them lifeless, discolored corpses. Another is apparently immolated. Most of the Eternals are beaten mercilessly, too punched and kicked and punched and stabbed and thrown and punched some more. The deviants die far more gorily. One has its head sliced off, splattering goopy black blood over his adversary. Another gets cut into pieces. A third is turned into a tree. They're shot and stabbed and sometimes partly vaporized, though one has the ability to heal itself. Meanwhile, mere mortals like you and me deal with violence, too. One man is eaten alive by a deviant, and several others are wildly imperiled. But often their biggest threat comes from each other. The Eternals watch as Spanish conquistadors gun down Aztec warriors in the latter's capital city, Tenochtitlan. Only a bit of mind control from an Eternal stops the carnage. An Eternal kneels at the center of Hiroshima, post a bomb, looks at the devastation and rails that humankind isn't worth saving. A global earthquake rattles a museum classroom filled with children. Circe saves one girl from a falling stone by turning it to dust. A massive disturbance causes the ground to wave like the ocean and for the ocean to roil like a storm on Jupiter. We see images of entire planets exploding from the inside. We hear references to the blip, which took out half the population of the universe. 3 S-words and a handful of other profanities, including A and H. God's name is misused about 4 times. Circe, Dane and Sprite hang out in a nightclub where many folks are drinking beer and other alcoholic beverages. Sprite masquerades as a young woman. But when the man she's with tries to touch her hand and finds that it's an illusion, she tells him that he's just had too much to drink. Gilgamesh serves an alcoholic beverage to his friends that he says was fermented in his own spit. When someone mentions the worldwide earthquake, he recalls it. "I thought I was drunk," he says. Spoiler warning: in a post-credits scene, a drunken troll named Pip makes an appearance. There's plenty of duplicity at work here, but I'll leave it at that. Perhaps it's fitting that the whole plot of the Eternals revolves around imperfect creators. This particular cinematic creation is far, far, far from perfect itself. Aesthetically, it's a rare misfire from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Directed by Chloé Zhao, fresh off her well-deserved Oscar for Nomadland, Eternals nevertheless suffers from too many characters, too many villains and too many complicated plot points. Audiences must soldier through a great deal of narrative exposition to get to the, admittedly cool, action sequences which are then, in turn, followed up by still more narrative exposition. Last time I checked, superhero movies are supposed to be fun. This film is pretty to look at and sometimes visually spectacular, but it's also often rather humorless, dense, and dull. If I was to rank movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I'd say that this and Thor: The Dark World bring up the MCU rear. But Thor: The Dark World, at least didn't have Thor and Jane having sex on screen. And while The Dark World certainly boasted its own non-Christian elements, Thor's title, after all, is the God of Thunder. It knew not to take its mythos too seriously. Eternals, meanwhile, cherry-picks elements from a bevy of faiths and stirs them up in a big pot of nothingness, offering us a bargain bin full of gods but no divinity, no transcendence, no meaning at all. At the core of all its pain theology lie truths that would seem banal in humanistic sing-along songs for second graders. Follow your heart. Love will find a way. Eternals focuses on characters that, as the name suggests, never really die. Well, mostly. But this movie? I can hope it disappears quickly and is forgotten, even in the MCU canon. But according to the story, Earth, and pert near every other planet, was the work of massive alien beings known as the Celestials. Alas, the planetary crust had barely cooled before their creations were soured by nefarious deep space creatures dubbed deviants. Those deviants were a ravenous bunch so nasty and, for the most part, toothy that they threatened to devour everything the Celestials had created. The Celestials were too busy floating in the void of space to take direct action. So clearly, some galactic police were needed to safeguard creation. So the Celestials made the Eternals mega-powered beings with your typical super array of physics-bending talents to protect their precious planets and fight the deviants. And those Eternals were a spiritualized bunch, given strict instructions to not muck around in planetary affairs unless a deviant was involved. But here's the thing, if you're an Eternal, you're eventually going to run out of deviants to fight. That's what happened on Earth. The planet's collection of Eternals had done a super great job battling their natural foes. They ignored wars and famines and all manner of woes to exterminate the planet's deviants. By around the year 1500 or so, there were no deviants left. And then things got a little depressing. A couple of Eternals wondered why, with so much time on their hands, being eternal and all, they couldn't help the planet in other ways. One or two openly questioned their leader, a Jack. And since YouTube hadn't been invented yet, the Eternals began to bicker a bit over how to keep themselves busy. A Jack told them nicely to just take off. Their jobs were done. Why not spend a few centuries living normal lives? And so they went their own ways, each to live as he or she thought was best. Circe, the crew's expert matter manipulator, wound up in London, living in a flat with fellow Eternal, and Eternal 11-year-old, Sprite, because London flats are apparently that expensive. She snagged herself a boyfriend, a fellow named Dane Whitman, who had no clue that she was almost certain to outlive him. She lectured at the Natural History Museum and diddled on her phone. She looked at her life and thought, yes, it was good. But no one told the earthbound deviants that they were supposed to be extinct. One lovely London evening, Circe and Sprite spot a couple of deviants wreaking havoc on a city street and with a hankering for a little eternal gumbo. The two fight the things, but the battle could have gotten out of hand had not another Eternal Icarus literally flown into town at that very moment. As the strongest Eternal, Icarus completes the deviant beatdown and says hello to Circe and Sprite, whom he'd not seen for 500 years or so. But clearly, these Eternals have more on their plates than uncomfortable reunions. Where did those deviants come from, anyway? The Eternals sometimes call themselves a family, and they do seem, for the most part, to care for one another. And there's no better illustration of that connection than the relationship between Gilgamesh and Thena. Both are strong warriors. But, alas, Thena is apparently going crazy, which makes her pretty dangerous. It's something, leader Ajak tells us, that happens to many Eternals after a while. The only way to cure it is to wipe Thena's cerebral hard drive and start fresh. But Thena doesn't want to forget, and Ajak promises to take care of her, which he does for centuries. Thena also says one of the movie's more poignant lines, "When you love something, you protect it," she says, thinking perhaps of Gilgamesh's protective care, but also of the Eternals' centuries of work. It's the most natural thing in the world. Turns out, to protect Earth, something that most of the Eternals have come to love, will require untold, and unexpected, sacrifices. And many of these super beings are willing to make them. We could spend the rest of the review unpacking Eternals' incredibly messy spirituality. And caution, there will be some possible spoilers in this section. The movie is telling its own myths and weaving, if you will, its own religion, one that contains elements of ancient pagan beliefs and Eastern philosophy, but that still is very much its own thing. And if we try to overlay Christianity on top of the creation/destruction myths of Eternals to see if we can find some sort of Christian meaning in it all, we're in for some disappointment. If we make the Celestials, especially the Celestial Prime, Ereshkigal, analogous to God, that would make the Eternals their angels, and rebellious ones at that. Turns out, what Ereshkigal and many of the Eternals differ on what is the right thing to do, cosmically speaking. Now, Christians know what became of angels that rebelled against their creator, and it wasn't good. But perhaps the movie's Celestials aren't worthy of obedience. We go back to Thena's statement that we should protect the things we love. Without getting into the details, the Celestials aren't really about protecting their creations, rather, those creations are a means to an end. That's very out of character with the God that we know. The Eternals, then, are probably more analogous to Prometheus, a Grecian god/hero that gave the gift of fire to humanity against the god's wishes than Lucifer. Eternals takes plenty of cues from classic paganism and ancient myth. Gilgamesh takes his name from an ancient Sumerian hero. Circe, Icarus and Athena all stem from Greek gods and heroes, and Athena is repeatedly name-checked as the Greek goddess of war. The names and, in some cases the abilities of Macquarie, Ajak, and Phostos, characters we've not gotten to in this review, also can be traced back to Greek story and mythology. While one Eternal reminds another that he is not literally a god, it's suggested that the Eternals are the basis for the myths and devotion that sprang up around them. Despite all this spiritualism, the film seems to do its best to distance itself from any breath of Judaism and Christianity. We hear a snarky reference to Noah's Ark, and a character does paraphrase scripture, saying the truth will set them free. And one Eternal does buzz by Rio de Janeiro's famous Christ the Redeemer statue. Instead, the story seems to lean more into Hinduism. Two characters get married in what appears to be a Hindu ceremony, while a funeral rite is presided over by an Indian mortal. And the themes of the cycle of creation and destruction, big themes in Hinduism, and other faith systems, undergirds much of the film. The only currently married couple we meet here is a same-sex couple, Phostos and his human mate, who are raising a son in Chicago. We see the two share a lingering goodbye kiss and hear a great deal about how much they love each other. Both are clearly dutiful fathers. Though Marvel has had other nods to LGBT characters, this is the first gay relationship that the MCU has depicted on screen. We have a few other couples to make note of here, too. Circe and Icarus are the most notable. They, too, got hitched, in the aforementioned Hindu ceremony, but that comes literally centuries after the two have sex for the first time, which, in a first for a Marvel movie, we see on screen. It's not R-rated, of course, but we do see them partly disrobe and lay down on some rock/sand as the camera films them from the shoulders up, engaged in a bit of movement. While Icarus and Circe didn't officially divorce, Icarus did mysteriously take off for 500 years, enough, you would think, for a common law divorce, and Circe found a new lover in Dane Whitman. The couple kisses and flirts as well, and Dane's put off by the fact that Circe refuses to move in with him. Two other Eternals, Macquarie and Druig, appear to be a couple, too, and we see them engaged in flirty behavior. Sprite, who's eternally 11, has a crush on another Eternal, and she's pretty frustrated that her age makes it impossible for her to be with him. She's an illusionist, and she turns herself into a young adult woman at a nightclub to flirt with an unsuspecting mortal. Women sometimes dress in ever so slightly revealing garb, and most of the Eternals' outfits are skin tight. The movie has plenty of the violence we'd expect in superhero flicks, so I won't belabor that too much. But this is an important note: despite their moniker, a few Eternals die here. One particularly bright deviant can suck the life literally out of them. Through a bevy of organic tubes he stabs into them, leaving them lifeless, discolored corpses. Another is apparently immolated. Most of the Eternals are beaten mercilessly, two punched and kicked and punched and stabbed and thrown and punched some more. The deviants die far more gorily. One has its head sliced off, splattering goopy black blood over his adversary. Another gets cut into pieces. A third is turned into a tree. They're shot and stabbed and sometimes partly vaporized, though one has the ability to heal itself. Meanwhile, mere mortals like you and me deal with violence, too. One man is eaten alive by a deviant, and several others are wildly imperiled. But often their biggest threat comes from each other. The Eternals watch as Spanish conquistadors gun down Aztec warriors in the latter's capital city, Tenochtitlan. Only a bit of mind control from an Eternal stops the carnage. An Eternal kneels at the center of Hiroshima, post-A bomb, looks at the devastation and rails that humankind isn't worth saving. A global earthquake rattles a museum classroom filled with children. Circe saves one girl from a falling stone by turning it to dust. A massive disturbance causes the ground to wave like the ocean and for the ocean to roil like a storm on Jupiter. We see images of entire planets exploding from the inside. We hear references to the blip, which took out half the population of the universe. Circe, Dane and Sprite hang out in a nightclub where many folks are drinking beer and other alcoholic beverages. Sprite masquerades as a young woman. But when the man she's with tries to touch her hand and finds that it's an illusion, she tells him that he's just had too much to drink. Gilgamesh serves an alcoholic beverage to his friends that he says was fermented in his own spit. When someone mentions the worldwide earthquake, he recalls it. "I thought I was drunk," he says. Perhaps it's fitting that the whole plot of the Eternals revolves around imperfect creators. This particular cinematic creation is far from perfect itself. Aesthetically, it's a rare misfire from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Directed by Chloé Zhao, fresh off her well-deserved Oscar for Nomadland, Eternals nevertheless suffers from too many characters, too many villains and too many complicated plot points. Audiences must soldier through a great deal of narrative exposition to get to the, admittedly cool, action sequences which are then, in turn, followed up by still more narrative exposition. Last time I checked, superhero movies are supposed to be fun. This film is pretty to look at and sometimes visually spectacular, but it's also often rather humorless, dense, and dull. If I was to rank movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I'd say that this and Thor: The Dark World bring up the MCU rear. But Thor: The Dark World, at least didn't have Thor and Jane having sex on screen. And while The Dark World certainly boasted its own non-Christian elements, Thor's title, after all, is the God of Thunder. It knew not to take its mythos too seriously. Eternals, meanwhile, cherry-picks elements from a bevy of faiths and stirs them up in a big pot of nothingness, offering us a bargain bin full of gods but no divinity, no transcendence, no meaning at all. At the core of all its pain theology lie truths that would seem banal in humanistic sing-along songs for second graders. Follow your heart. Love will find a way. Eternals focuses on characters that, as the name suggests, never really die. Well, mostly. But this movie? I can hope it disappears quickly and is forgotten, even in the MCU canon. Eternals feels like Marvel's most ambitious project crammed into the span of a 157-minute movie. I hate to be the "it should have been a TV series" guy, but maybe it should have been a TV series because everything here is largely abbreviated. For example, Icarus and Circe were in love with each other and married, but they broke up about 100 years ago, and now Circe is seeing the human Dane Whitman, Kit Harington. Circe and Icarus' feelings for each other are largely shorthand, letting us know that there are some lingering emotions, but any texture of their relationship or really showing us a love story that has spanned thousands of years doesn't have time to make the final cut. This abbreviation moves through all of the characters and leaves you wishing you could spend more time with them rather than getting the CliffsNotes version of their epic inner turmoil. Each character really only gives you a glimpse of something greater. For Sprite, who's doomed to look like a child, she longs for the benefit of living among humans to the full extent of adult relationships. For Phastos, who has the ability to invent anything, he has seen how human technological progression has wrought massive destruction, and wonders if we're even worth saving if our creations only bring about mass casualties. For Druig, who has the power to control minds, he toys with the idea of creating a zombie utopia where humans lack free will but also don't slaughter each other en masse. For Thena, she's the greatest warrior in history, but she's suffering from a degenerative mental illness called MAD-WIRI, pronounced mad-weary, that makes her unable to distinguish between friend and foe. What if you could live forever, but were plagued by disease? How would you continue to live your life? These are all fascinating questions, and Eternals simply does not have time to dwell on them. They linger in the background, inviting us to think more about them, but then the plot taps its watch, says it's time to move on, and then we're on to fighting deviants. If you strip away the superhero stuff, you have a fascinating assemblage of narratives that I'd love to see play out, but this is a Marvel movie, and Marvel movies are superhero stories. I like Marvel movies and they're indisputably one of the most successful studios of all time, but they only make one thing. They may dress that thing up in different colors, but at its core, it must be a superhero movie. For all of its narrative twists and turns, and there are some really cool reveals in Eternals, the film still has to build up to good guys using their extraordinary abilities to save humanity. In that limiting framework, you can see Eternals struggle valiantly to be more than just another MCU entry, and while it certainly feels different than your typical MCU movie, references to other Marvel movies are kept mercifully brief, it also feels limited by its genre and framework. It would have been great to see a series about immortal beings wrestling with their relationship to humanity on the brink of a world-ending calamity, but Marvel can't and won't make that series because Eternals needs to continue, the world can never end, and Marvel characters are designed to make sure the world is saved. Eternals adds in a few neat wrinkles here and there, but the bigger questions at the heart of these characters are eventually pushed to the wayside because the plot has to keep moving forward to its climactic battle. And that's a shame because the battle stuff is nowhere close to the best part of Eternals. In terms of pacing and action, Eternals is a real letdown. The plot keeps stuttering forward as it unloads heaps of exposition, jumps between the present and the past, and continually reintroduces characters when it would be so much better to simply settle down and really get to know the Eternals as individuals. Whenever it's time for an action scene, almost all of the air goes out of the picture because even though the Eternals have neat abilities and the movie tries to create a main deviant with some semblance of a belief system, it's still superheroes using CGI to fight CGI monsters. Perhaps if these set pieces were more exciting, that would be one thing, but they're largely forgettable and also not particularly well lit. There's one action scene in the Amazon that's almost monochrome with how dim the lighting gets. Despite these glaring flaws, I can't simply write off Eternals as forgettable. The film is willing to tackle such heady notions of faith, predestination, devotion, and heresy that to say it's just another superhero movie would be way off the mark. The problem is that Eternals is a far more interesting film trapped in the body of a superhero movie, and those limitations neuter what could have been a heady, thrilling experience if not for what the film has to do both in its genre and as part of the MCU. That means it drags, has perfunctory action scenes, and no time to explore the most interesting facets of its narrative. You can assemble an amazing cast and hire one of the best directors working today, but they're no match for what a Marvel movie must do to be a Marvel movie. The 26th movie in the overall Marvel Cinematic Universe and third of Phase 4, Eternals introduces an entirely new team of superheroes to Marvel Studios' franchise world. The film is directed by Chloé Zhao, Nomadland, from a script she co-wrote with Patrick Burley, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Ryan Firpo, Bet Raisfold, and Kaz Firpo, Refuge, and based on a story by the Firpos. Eternals adapts the Marvel Comics characters of the same name, which were created by Jack Kirby in 1976, bringing the alien heroes to the world of the MCU. While Eternals has most of the benchmarks of a Marvel movie, Zhao's sprawling superhero epic is unlike anything the MCU has produced before. The story of the film kicks off in 5000 BC, showing how the Eternals are sent to Earth to protect the planet and the humans who live on it from the evil aliens called deviants. Throughout time, the team battles the deviants until they're all but extinct, though the Eternals are forbidden from getting involved in any human conflict. The movie picks up in present day with the team having split up. Cersei, Gemma Chan, is living in London with Sprite, Leah McHugh, and dating the human Dane Whitman, Kid Harington. When a deviant attacks, Icarus, Richard Madden, arrives and the Eternals realize they must reassemble their team. The three of them travel the world to visit their former team members, Ajak, Salma Hayek, Kingo, Kumail Nanjiani, Thena, Angelina Jolie, Gilgamesh, Don Lee, Druig. Barry Keoghan, Fostos, Brian Tyree Henry, and Macquarie, Lauren Ridloff. Together, they must figure out why the deviants are back and come up with a plan to protect the Earth. Despite the number of characters included in Eternals, Zhao's movie does an excellent job of weaving their stories together and showing the various ways each hero is affected by their time on Earth. However, a central thematic storyline is achieved by focusing much of the plot around Cersei and Ikaris. Their romantic relationship has ended by the time the film picks up in the present day, but it works as an emotional core to Eternals. Their romance is genuinely sweet, if rushed, with a montage that includes a marriage scene that is followed shortly by the MCU's very first sex scene, doing most of the work to establish Cersei and Ikaris' relationship. Their dynamic is much more complicated in the present-day storyline, and the tragedy of their failed romance gives Eternals much of its heart, providing a depth to the story. While Cersei and Ikaris receive much of the movie's attention, Eternals also gives the other characters their due. Sprite has her own tragic storyline as she struggles to fit into a world that sees her as a child, and McHugh fantastically pulls off the delicate balance such a character arc needs. Nanjiani's Kingo often acts as comedic relief in Eternals, which the actor is well suited for, though the third act seems like it doesn't know what to do with him. Thena and Gilgamesh have their own deep connection that's not quite as explored as Cersei and Ikaris, but Jolie and Lee are an immensely fun duo to watch. Keoghan, Henry, Ridloff, and Hayek are all given something to work with, even if their characters are slightly more one-note. Still, there is a surprising amount of depth to Druig, Fostos, Macquarie and Ajak that is either explicitly laid out for viewers or hinted at through the characters' actions and interactions with the other Eternals. Overall, the film was given the monumental task of introducing 10 completely new characters to the MCU and developing them enough to ensure audiences would root for them all, and Zhao deftly pulls it off. Though Eternals is essentially a character drama, Zhao still manages to include most of the major hallmarks of a Marvel movie, particularly action and humor, for better or worse. The action of Eternals is, for the most part, grounded in reality largely because Zhao films the fight scenes in daylight and on location. There's little of the grayish half-light or CGI backgrounds. This makes the movie feel more immersive and the action more thrilling as a result, with the exception of certain shots of Ikaris flying and fighting deviants. As for the comedy, Eternals has humor in spades thanks to both Kingo and Sprite. While much of the comedy is fun and entertaining like most Marvel movies, there are other times when a joke undercuts an important emotional moment, though Eternals does this less than Thor, Ragnarok. For all Eternals attempts to stand apart from other MCU entries, and it does, mostly, achieve this, it's still very much a Marvel movie. That might be comforting for those who really like the Marvel formula and disheartening for others hoping to finally get a truly different MCU film. Ultimately, Eternals is worth seeing for all fans of the MCU, from casual to diehard. Zhao is able to provide enough of a different Marvel movie experience for Eternals to feel fresh, at least compared to past phases. Phase 4 is proving to be one of Marvel's most experimental, with Black Widow, Shang-Chi, and the Ten Rings, and now Eternals bringing something new and never before seen to the MCU, which is exciting both in terms of each individual viewing experience and for the franchise as a whole. The 26th film in the franchise may set up an exciting future for the MCU, though it should be noted the post-credits scenes were not shown during this reviewer's press screening, but Eternals is a thrilling, epic superhero adventure all its own, with a captivating emotional heart brought to life beautifully by Zhao's direction. It's a Marvel movie unlike anything the MCU has seen thus far. Director Chloé Zhao applies her distinctive aesthetic imprint to Eternals, but she can only do so much to bend the Marvel Cinematic Universe to her will. The result is a blockbuster of unusual gentle beauty that also strains to fulfill the gargantuan requirements of a massive action spectacle. It is, in short, a bit of a mess. It is also, and I cannot stress this enough, 2 hours and 37 minutes long. And yet, because the talented, eclectic cast is so enormous and so much world building must occur, Eternals ultimately feels rushed and unsatisfying. The mythology here is both dense and frequently silly, with the movie grinding to a halt around the 1-hour mark for an extensive information dump. By the end, you may still be unclear as to what's going on, but you also may not care. Zhao, the newly minted Academy Award winner for Best Picture and director for The Spare and Intimate Nomadland, does offer a great deal of her signature style, though. For those of you who found the choice of Zhao a fascinating one and wondered what her version of the MCU might look like, you'll be happy to learn she manages to find magic hour wherever she goes, from a breezy sunset on the shores of ancient Babylon to ominous storm clouds gathering on the plains of present-day South Dakota. Working with cinematographer Ben Davis, who also shot Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, and Captain Marvel, she consistently provides opportunities to let us slow down, take a breath, and enjoy a moment of naturalism and stillness. You can feel the sun-baked heat of the windy Australian outback. An action scene set in a torch-lit forest at night is especially stunning. Zhao and her fellow screenwriters Patrick Burley and Ryan Firpo and Kaz Firpo lurch around in time in an ungainly fashion to tell the story of a group of immortal beings living secretly on Earth. Each has his or her own specific abilities, but, collectively, they share the quippy humor that's become so typical in Marvel movies. The casting and characteristics on display here are revolutionary and, at first, cause for inspiration that we might be in for something totally different. There's a natural diversity at work in ways we haven't seen from the Avengers, for example. From the leadership of Salma Hayek's Jack and Gemma Chan Cersei to Brian Tyree Henry and Hasley Iman as a gay couple with a young son to Lauren Ridloff's Macquarie, whose hearing impairment is her superpower. The inclusive nature of Eternals feels both exciting and effortless. Angelina Jolie's Thena is a ferocious warrior who also suffers from mental illness, which the film handles sensitively. Conversely, Leah McHugh livens things up as the androgynous, forever young sprite. Perhaps most striking of all, two characters have actual sex, which is unprecedented and long overdue in a cinematic world where everyone is super hot and muscular and dressed in form-fitting costumes. The scene is brief, but it accomplishes so much to indicate a deeper and more vulnerable sense of humanity in these comic book figures. Tony Stark and Pepper Potts probably did it. Clint Barton definitely did because he had kids. But most other romantic relationships have featured benign flirting at most, so to see these characters behaving like grown people in this manner is yet another example of the potential lurking within Eternals. There is also a plot, however, which will escape your mind as quickly as it entered. Briefly, the Eternals have scattered across the globe in the centuries since they arrived on Earth in a spaceship that resembles a behemoth, black marble Dorito. All along, they've been stealthily guiding humanity and fighting ravenous, sinewy monsters known as deviants. But a potentially cataclysmic event forces them to leave the comfortable lives they've forged for themselves, reassemble, if you'll forgive the word choice, and use their combined superpowers to stop what is essentially the apocalypse. Again, you don't need to be deeply steeped in Marvel lore in general or Jack Kirby's trippy comic series specifically to follow Eternals, aside from a brief reference to Thanos, and why these heroes didn't step in to stop the events of Avengers: Infinity War. This feels more like a standalone film than most in the MCU. Having said that, of course you'll get more out of the movie if you're a fan, and the obligatory end credit sequences will mean more to you, too. Chan Cersei, with her transmutational abilities, and Richard Madden's Icarus, a versatile, Superman-type figure prominently as centuries-old, on and off-again lovers. Charismatic as Madden is, though, Chan enjoys greater sparks with Kit Harington as her mortal, London-based boyfriend, Dane Whitman, who shares Cersei's interest in archaeology. Whatever emotional stakes may exist between any of these characters eventually take a backseat to flying around and zapping monsters with eye lasers. You can feel the struggle in trying to juggle it all. And the climactic action extravaganza is so glossy and cacophonous, it could have been plucked out of any number of soulless, sci-fi spectacles over the past decade, smothering all the smaller charms we'd enjoyed along the way. A newly buff Kumail Nanjiani offers some laughs as a pompous Bollywood star, Don Lee provides a kind presence despite his hulking power, and Barry Keoghan merely has to show up to make us feel his unnerving vibe. All of these actors prove they're up for the challenge of trying to establish complicated characters within the frenzy of the MCU machinery. Frustratingly, they and Zhao can only serve as cogs. Marvel Cinematic Universe mastermind Kevin Feige's style and design for the look and feel of the content he produces for his Disney overlords has calcified with his latest entry, Eternals. I use the dreaded word content. It's a word that makes me throw up in my mouth a little. It's more at home in a marketing meeting than discussions about art or entertainment, because that's what Eternals feels like, rather than a story or a movie. At an interminable 157 minutes, it's an attempt at entertainment that bolsters Martin Scorsese's assertion that Marvel movies are more theme park attraction than storytelling. Even as a $200 million roller coaster, Eternals is lifeless and largely joyless. The only fun thing about it is a few of the performances where a human spark peeks through the calculatedness of it all. I'm laying authorship for Eternals at Feige's feet. Despite director Chloé Zhao's delicate filmmaking style and empathetic storytelling in films like The Rider and the beautiful and moving Nomadland, her personal aesthetic is swallowed whole by the MCU house style in Eternals. Other than a few fleeting moments featuring one of her signature camera moves, in which her camera, at a remove, almost documentary style, follows behind characters as they walk, anyone could have made this movie. Themes like empathy and compassion are present, likely because of Zhao's contribution to the screenplay, which she wrote in collaboration with Patrick Burley, Ryan Firpo, and Kaz Firpo, from an original story by the Firpo cousins. Those explorations are made incidental, though, by the usual MCU pablum and deadening action sequences that come along like clockwork every 25 minutes or so. In the post-Endgame MCU, after meeting Thanos, who gained the power to obliterate half the population of the universe, that is before the inevitable reset button is pressed, we learn at the beginning of Eternals that there are beings infinitely more powerful than Thanos could ever hope to be. The MCU is getting into a real it's turtles all the way down situation. Each time I watch an MCU movie now, I'm acutely aware that none of what I'm seeing probably matters much. A bigger threat is always one movie away. Billions of years ago, the omniscient Celestials, led by the all-powerful Ereshkigal, an analog to the Christian deity Yahweh, wanted to create intelligent life, like humans, in the universe. As a means of helping it develop, Ereshkigal created the deviants to prey on apex predators, like the ones found on Earth. Like Yahweh, somehow the omnipotent Ereshkigal failed to see that his plan was flawed. One of the most unsatisfying things about Eternals is that it's essentially an allegory about an allegory, but with nothing interesting to say about its source material. In a misuse of the concept of evolution that would make Charles Darwin cry, we learn that the deviants on Earth evolved to hunt humans in addition to their intended prey. In order to cull the deviant population so that humans might thrive, Ereshkigal created the Eternals. They were instructed to protect humans from deviants, but not to interfere in any other human conflict. That tidy bit of storytelling immediately shuts down the obvious questions about why the Eternals didn't lift a finger against Thanos or any of the other existential threats humanity has faced in the MCU. The explanation comes after a character raises that very issue, as a surrogate for the audience. Ereshkigal, we learn, has a hidden plan for humanity. The reveal, which makes writing a spoiler-free review tricky, comes near the midpoint of the picture. It's obliquely referenced in the movie's trailer as the emergence, so that's all I'll mention as well. In what is my wife's least favorite trope of MCU fare, our heroes spend the bulk of the movie squabbling amongst themselves. Should they go along with Ereshkigal's plan or defy their maker? The internecine strife has definite Captain America, Civil War vibes. Our 10 heroes, Ajak, Circe, Ikaris, Kingo, Sprite, Phostos, Makari, Druig, Gilgamesh, and Thena, split up in 1521, after killing what they thought was the last deviant on Earth. They are forbidden from returning to their home planet, Olympia, until Ereshkigal gives them further instructions. In 2021, the Eternals must find each other again when a deviant attacks, killing one of their own. Instead of using something like an inventive mystery scenario, where one Eternal must play sleuth to find the others, the co-writers settled on a structure that is straightforward and rather bland. The immortal beings reassemble one by one as helpful, and, more often than not, boring, flashbacks from the team's past exploits fill us in on their intrapersonal dynamics. Cersei and Ikaris were madly in love half a millennium ago, but have drifted apart. King O presides over a Bollywood-adjacent media empire. Druig, who can control the minds of others, is determined to intervene in humanity's inclination to slaughter one another. He has set himself up as a god in a closed society where peace reigns. Druig's path, and the event that precipitates it, is the worst example of trivializing real-world suffering and trauma for Marvel world building. In the sequence set in 1521, after the Eternals have killed what they think is the last deviant, our heroes witness Spanish conquistadors massacring an indigenous tribe. It feels cheap, demeaning, and a little slimy for the MCU to use a genocide as a backdrop for a rollicking good superhero action-adventure movie. Ditto the explanation about where these new deviants have come from. It seems that global warming, the biggest existential crisis that real, actual humanity has ever faced, has melted glaciers that kept some of the ancient deviants locked in ice. It's an unsettling feeling to realize that a bajillion-dollar entertainment monopoly is using two incredibly complex, divisive topics of our modern era, climate change and the legacy of colonialist-driven subjugation and murder, as window dressing for their superhero smash 'em up. There are elements within Eternals worthy of praise. I was on board with most of the performances. Particularly noteworthy is Gemma Chan as Cersei. Chan has a quiet strength as Cersei that translates to a calming effect, contrasting nicely with all the chaos. Kumail Nanjiani as King O is fun as the primary comic relief in the movie, although most of his comedic bits, which he shares with King O's valet character, Karun, fall flat. I would be pissed if I trained as hard as Nanjiani did on his physique for the film. His arms, which, to be fair, look like they're cut from marble, are about the only thing he gets to show off in Eternals. 16-year-old Leah McHugh gives pathos to Sprite, the only Eternal perpetually stuck in a kid's body. Brian Tyree Henry is fun and funny as Phastos, an Eternal obsessed with inventions who helps humans in their technological advances. Eternals is essentially Marvel's take on the done-to-death sci-fi, and wild-eyed conspiracy theory documentary, subgenre of Ancient Aliens. Angelina Jolie and Salma Hayek show up for what were presumably tidy little paychecks as Eternals Thena and Ajak, respectively. Thena suffers from a plot device, psychological condition known as Mod WYRE, which causes her to become confused and to attack her teammates. The bond that Thena forms with Eternal Gilgamesh is one of the most moving relationships of the movie, due in no small part to Don Lee's tender performance as Gilgamesh, which is the actor's Hollywood debut. Richard Madden, aka Robb Stark, is dour and overly serious as Ikaris. The conflict between Ikaris and most of the other Eternals late in the film is never earned. Two of the characters go out of their way during the climax to remark how much they've been looking forward to battling their comrade, but Eternals, over the course of its 2.5+ hours, never builds the dynamic that would justify that payoff. The visual effects in Eternals are about what you'd expect. They look good in an if anything is possible everything looks mundane kind of way. In one of the dozen or so dull action set pieces, a CGI bus is upended, Christopher Nolan style, only to be turned, by Cersei, into a million CGI pixels approximating flower petals. The tactility and immediacy of the same stunt in The Dark Knight, staged practically, with an 18-wheeler, is immeasurably more effective in that movie than what's achieved here. Eternals didn't make me care for what was happening on screen or almost any of its characters. It's a slog to get through, and even if I were an #1 fan of Marvel's output, this is an entry I wouldn't be eager to revisit. Another issue the film faces is its narrative structure. The Eternals have been here for 7,000 plus years watching and guiding humanity, and the decision to bounce around does a disservice to the story and pacing of the film. Telling the story chronologically until Prime Eternal Jack, Salma Hayek, sends the team off on their own would not only establish the cast as individuals but also as a unit. Plus, their decision to get together would be more impactful, which would allow the story to slow down in the present day. This structural problem is indicative of another issue with the Eternals. The editing. The montage between Icarus, Richard Madden, and Cersei shows them falling in love. The cinematography is gorgeous with the backdrop of Babylon, but the tender moments are intercut with erratic cuts between the characters, the civilians, and backgrounds. This is supposed to be a moment of closeness between two characters, but instead, it feels exhausting. The rest of the movie uses the same technique, placing scenes at odd moments and durations, such as when a Jack checks in with Fausto's, Brian Tyree Henry, after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Fausto's is plagued with regret and believes man isn't worth saving. It's a small but powerful moment. Rather than feel the emotional weight, the audience only gets a glimpse of it. These scenes tell the audience what to feel, rather than allow them to experience it organically. The final act also rushes to introduce several plot points and concepts such as Druig, Barry Keoghan, and Macquarie's, Lauren Ridloff, relationship, and King O's, Kumail Nanjiani, refusal to join the fight. Nanjiani is the much-needed comic relief of this movie with his sidekick Karun, Harish Patel, so it's an interesting choice to have him in this movie for as much as he is only to have him walk away from the fight. It's a fascinating take on what it means to be a hero, but the lack of exploration and resolution makes the action seem more inconsequential than anything else. The movie quickly gets repetitive since they're essentially collecting team members from around the world. Instead of focusing on the exotic settings, the movie could have spent more of its runtime paying attention to the characters and their motivations. We see glimpses of what could have been a very different movie from Marvel Studios, but instead the film doubles down on basic story elements, cheapening what could have otherwise been a complex character study. If one is adapting the work of comic book artist and author Jack Kirby, particularly the era of Jack Kirby when he was obsessed with chariots of the gods and trying to create extraordinary new cosmologies for first the DC and then the Marvel Universe, I think the obviously correct thing to do would be to embrace the loopy, bonkers excess of Kirby's wild, fever dream images and jettison the lumbering, fever dream but in a bad way illegibility of the storytelling. Eternals, the 26th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and notoriously, the first one to get a serious paddling from film critics, ending up with a Rotten Tomatoes score south of 50%, goes exactly the other way. The look is pure pseudo-Malick boilerplate, with director Chloé Zhao, lately an Oscar winner for Nomadland, playing the only game she knows how to play in drenching the whole movie in a flat field of fuzzy golden sunset hues, except for a murky, underlit sequence in the Amazon jungle at night. It's banal and trite looking, though I'll admit that it's nice to have one of these films look flat and washed out but yellow, instead of the flat and washed out grays that have been the MCU house style for some time now. There are some appropriately Kirby-ish touches. A few times, we get to see a moon-sized robot god thing called Arishem, voiced by David Kaye, its hands roughly the size of a city, its 6 eyes blazing red like retro rockets, and this made me very happy. The best of these are backloaded, though, and are too little and much too late to make much of the sandy blandness of the bulk of the film. Meanwhile, the story is just garbage. Complicated, millennia-spanning, backstory-laden garbage that involved 5 screenwriters, Zhao counting for 2 of them. It's a good thing, to put it over. I have not read Kirby's Eternals comics, and don't really know much about them other than that they're the off-brand version of DC's New Gods, which Kirby had tried and failed to get started during his short time at that publishing house. So I can't say how much the film we've got here is reflective of any particular moment in that title's run, but I will say that it's approximately as far up its own ass as Kirby's most cosmologically dense stories tended to be. An opening crawl gives us most of what we need to know, in the beginning, Arishem and the race of godlike beings called Celestials created all of everything. Everything included two races, deviants, who are basically large predatory animals made up solely of ropey gray sinew, and Eternals, immortal humanoid warriors tasked with keeping the deviants from destroying all of life on the planets the Celestials have created. Planets like Earth, which receives a team of 10 Eternals sometime around 5000 BCE, in Mesopotamia. They are Deep Breath, the leader Ajak, Salma Hayek, a magical healer, Icarus, Richard Madden, who shoots beams of energy and flies, Circe, Gemma Chan, who can change matter into other types of matter, Thena, Angelina Jolie, who fights with edges weapons she summons out of thin air, Kingo, Kumail Nanjiani, who shoots beams of energy, but he shoots his out of his hands, while Icarus shoots them out of his eyes, and Kingo can't fly, Sprite, Leah McHugh, who creates visual illusions and is eternally trapped in the body of a pubescent girl, Phostos, Brian Tyree Henry, who makes devices, Macquarie, Lauren Ridloff, who runs extremely fast, Druig, Barry Keoghan, who can control the minds of sapient beings, and Gilgamesh, Don Lee, who punches enormously hard. Why Gilgamesh's name is exactly the same as the mythic figure he inspired while everybody else's has been corrupted with age, I cannot say. The story that Eternals spools out over 157 of the most laconic, indulgent minutes in the history of popcorn movies is basically this: the Eternals killed all of the deviants, as far as they can tell, by the end of the 16th century. Now they're just killing time until Arishem recalls them. They've mostly scattered across the globe, in at least a couple of instances because they don't want to see each other anymore. Circe and Icarus, for example, were a romantic item for a couple thousand years before breaking up about a century ago. She's moved on and has found a human boyfriend, Dane Whitman, Kit Harington. You will notice that I have not, in fact, started telling you what the story is. This is a side effect of Eternals not actually having a story, really, just having a great mighty fuckton of exposition. Let us say that the deviants aren't so dead as all that, and they're apparently targeting the Eternals. To make matters worse, they killed Ajak before any of the other 9 knew what was going on, so now they're leaderless. This leaves it up to Circe, Icarus, and Sprite to find the other 6 and convince them to team back up while trying to figure out how to stop the new super deviant chasing them around the globe, and dealing with Thena's tendency to go into trances where she sees apocalyptic visions and tries to kill the rest of them. These visions are of course somewhat grounded in reality, and by the time the flashbacks have dried up, the surviving Eternals must find a way to save, wait for it, the entire world and every living thing on it. That old chestnut. This is not without its charms. Generally speaking, the film is best when it is the most deadly serious, which really sucks for Nanjiani, Henry, and McHugh, stuck playing the anachronistic quip-bots who do a poor job of brining in some very labored MCU-style humor to the proceedings, using 21st century speech patterns and attitude even when we see them in e.g. 575 BCE, and it's the most deadly serious when it's set in the past. So the flashback material that is, narratively speaking, the most cumbersome material in the film is also, aesthetically speaking, the most rewarding. It has the epic scale and self-conscious grandiosity required to put over its bombastic cosmology. It is, in this respect and none other, a bit closer to the Zack Snyder DC films than the rest of the MCU, and the hazy aesthetic works much better in portraying various periods in the distant past than empty fields and beaches in the present day. The film's prologue, up through the point that the Eternals give humanity the metal knife that, apparently, kickstarts technological development. Kirby was an avowed fan of 2001, A Space Odyssey, is even very good, and I was ready to settle in for a nice time being in awe of the solemn ponderousness of everything, right up until we skipped to the present day and things just went slack. Yes, slack, that's the word for it. Eternals is a slack film, in the way one gets to be when one has no pressing need to come in at a reasonable running time, or to worry much about saving money, The film cost $200 million, and I think I would be lying if I said I saw it. Just among autumn 2021 movies of more than 2.5 hours that involve complicated outer space politics, Dune is cheaper and handsomer. The story is just not remotely focused, plot threads wander in, including one fairly major one centered on the superdeviant, and then a blow away in the wind. The climax involves one character deciding for no conceivable reason to go home before the big fight and a different character announcing "I always wanted to do this" in the absence of anything slightly resembling foreshadowing for that point. We're told a lot and shown some. The characters are all moved along without any definition. Sprite hates being trapped in a child's body and Fastos is gay, and that is very nearly all that we get for personality development between the 10 leads, 11 if you count Dane. There's not much in the acting to help with that. Nanjiani rests on broad comedy to get by, while Jolie amps up the moments where her character is confused or sad, and Keoghan leans so hard into his character's bitterness and loneliness that it feels like there should be more of a story built around it, and this is pretty much the full list of choices being made by the actors. Madden, whose character probably has to do the most heavy lifting to keep the plot on track, is a perfectly empty vessel, maybe not the most boring member of the ensemble. I had a tendency to forget Lee's Gilgamesh was a character whenever he wasn't on screen, but certainly the most ruinous to the whole. All that being said, is this the worst Marvel film, worthy of its plunging Rotten Tomatoes score? No, to the first part, at least. In a franchise that has given us the waterlogged Incredible Hulk from 2008 and the virtually unintelligible Captain Marvel from 2019, the worst is a competitive enough title that I don't think Eternals comes even close to stealing it. It looks decent, and it has multiple scenes that are good in isolation, and the action is uncommonly easy to follow, in nice long takes and wide shots that do a pretty good job of helping to let us see where characters are relative to each other and how they're moving through space. The visual effects look pretty great in general, though the deviants needed more time to cook. And at least it has the courage of its monumental tone, even if it doesn't do anything with it. The film is a failure, but it's only a failure, and if not for its miserably exhausting, slow-moving running time, not even an especially painful failure. And so comes Marvel Studios' Eternals, in which we discover the answer to one of the great pressing questions of our age: can the, thus far, invincible winning combination of the most precision-engineered crowd-pleaser assembly line ever created, courtesy the late Mr. Disney, won the greatest caches of intellectual property of the late 20th century, courtesy the later Mrs. Lee, Kirby, Simon, et al., a studio head, the very much alive Kevin Feige, capable of balancing the creative ambitions of emergent dynamic filmmaking talent with the demands of an evolving global mass-market audience and, yes, also just a ton of money to spend, but that's also being dispensed from a machine that is both made of and expects to devour more of that same money, still continue its unprecedented hat-trick victory streak, consistently winning with audiences, winning with critics, and raking in fortunes at the box office. Even when the formula is applied to something like The Eternals, a late 70s slice of esoteric ancient aliens head-scratchery, The Eternals generally among one of OG Marvel creator Jack Kirby's least popular, hardest to follow, shortest-lived creations, something unlikely any but the most devoted fans would bother or have remembered existed in 2021, if not for half a century of subsequent Marvel writers pillaging its more interesting conceptually than in actuality remains and turning its motley crew of characters and big idea mythology into the retroactive backstory of, well, everything else that Marvel has now made somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 other billion-dollar grossing interconnected movies and TV shows out of. So now the Eternals kind of have to get theirs, too. Plus, a few years ago when Marvel asked Chloé Zhao if she wanted to direct Black Widow and she said no thanks, but I've got some great ideas for the Eternals if you were gonna do a movie of that. And, hey, what kind of disastrously mismanaged studio operation has a red-hot awards darling young woman filmmaker walk into their office pitching a big-budget Jack Kirby Space Gods adaptation and doesn't follow through on it 100%, right? The answer, by the way, with apologies for getting sidetracked there, turns out to be no, by the way, at least as of this writing. The surprise twist seems to be that Eternals has proved more divisive among critics than among general audiences. And while I think it's always fair to say there's more than a little true that a certain percentage of the mainstream press has been waiting for a vulnerable spot to vent their frustrations with the off-putting omnipresence of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in the film discourse, I also think it's much more fair to consider, especially given the way review aggregates like Rotten Tomatoes tend to flatten out opinions into a crass yay or nay binary, that a divided response among professionals speaks more positively of certain works than a series of unqualified raves do. That modern blockbusters often get passing grades in the percentages while still being derided as overly safe and formulaic in the consensus says a lot about just how safe and formulaic so many of even the most well-made ones really are. And while my take on Eternals errs more to the positive side than a few of my respected colleagues, 8/10, ambition outweighs flaws, challenging, and deserves to be seen. If anyone was looking for the spot to piece out to avoid any mild or unintended spoilers, the fact is films that take creative risks, make big swings, do things that are different and don't necessarily try to be all things to all people are by definition not going to work from every subjective point of view just as often as they aren't going to work in the objective sense either. Sometimes a big risk doesn't actually pay off all the way. In any case, based on the short-lived series of late 70s Marvel Comics where Jack Kirby burned off the ideas he didn't get the use after DC didn't let him finish the New Gods books a few years prior, and also, conservatively speaking, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 years worth of reboots and retcons of the same thereafter, Eternals is more or less another blockbuster-scale repaint of the ancient aliens/chariots of the gods scenario, this time with a heavier unspoken lean to the Book of Enoch and Blake's take on Eliuri's take on the Old Testament plus some Gnostic pantheism to flavor the franchise-obligated Marvel superhero gloss. The Eternals of the title, at least so far as we or they are first aware, are a team of very handsome aliens gifted with immortal, indestructible bodies shaped like a humanoid adults, except for one who looks like a permanent teenager for some reason, but apparently the emotional development of adolescence and dispatched to prehistoric Earth at the dawn of human civilization in order to protect early man from a race of alien monsters called the Deviants using their superhuman strength and special individual powers under the vague guidance of the Celestials, gigantic, as in bigger than the sky gigantic, the cosmic gods, G this time, the real deal, unlike the whole Thor situation, who manage life, the universe, and everything in Marvel outer space. In any case, the Deviants look like various monsters familiar from mythology. Some of the Eternals have names like Thena, Ikaris and Gilgamesh, so, you get the idea there. It's apparently going to take several thousand years of human history to kill all these things, during which time the Eternals are supposed to take a Star Trek Prime Directive don't interfere and if you do at least try to be coy about it approach to nudging mankind along, presumably standing off to the side of history. Whispering have you considered? Will, tossing special swords out of lakes and slash or into stones, etc., that second one may or may not actually come up for real, since this is the Marvel Universe and it might need to be an actual plot point in someone else's movie later. Seriously. Fast forward 7,000 years to the present with the deviant problem apparently long ago cleared up and the Eternals have mostly gone their separate ways while waiting around on the down low on for the Celestials to swing back around to Earth and pick them up, until suddenly a new, more dangerous breed of deviant appears seemingly out of nowhere, possibly related to that whole evil glove that killed and then unkilled half the universe thing the Avengers were sorting out for several movies but which, it turns out, did in fact fall under the Eternals do not interfere hands-off policy. Either way, it's time to get the band back together, save that it turns out the Eternals found their mission/orders exactly as morally confused as everyone who watched that part the trailer. Amazing how that works out, and argued about it enough that most of them haven't seen one another in centuries. Gemma Chan's matter-rearranging alchemist Cersei is dating Kit Harington's handsome human history professor in London, if you're wondering why half your theater gets excited when his character says his name. just remember it's a Marvel movie and get comfy for the credits. Her ex-lover Icarus, Richard Madden, has been drifting around like a dour-mopey Superman. Kumail Nanjiani's Kingo has remade himself as a Bollywood movie star in India. Battlefield couple Gilgamesh, Korean action star Don Lee, and Cersei, Angelina Jolie, are off the grid because she's developed a mental condition involving apocalyptic visions, and others are, elsewhere, to put it mildly. As the search turns up more bad news, revelations about the true nature of their origins, their powers, the Celestials, and how the cosmic machinery of the Marvel Universe really operates, and why, and how they're supposed to fit into it, the Eternals have to face tough questions about the nature of their own existence and tougher choices about what they can, or even should, do to protect themselves, each other and the world around them. And that's basically our angle here. Immortal weirdos hashing out philosophy amidst an existential crisis during a slow burn apocalypse. Wings of Desire meets Until the End of the World, for those who never thought they'd come out of a Marvel movie thinking about one Wim Wenders feature, let alone two, where the biggest surprise of all might actually be that, for all the downplaying of Eternals as an actioner in favor of its cinematic mood piece value, which certainly exists, it turns out Chloé Zhao can put together some seriously crunchy, satisfying knock-around battle scenes, particularly in terms of how the sound design and location shooting add weight and texture to the oomph, when big guns like Don Lee, and later Brian Tyree Henry as deceptively gentle weaponsmith Phastos, are pounding the hell out of the generally nifty-looking deviants. But yes, make no mistake, they didn't lie. This is a movie fundamentally about characters who are themselves more heightened metaphors for aspects of the human condition than they are fully human themselves, confronting big existential questions about the nature of life, morality, choice, good and evil, causality, philosophy, and also huge complex science fiction what-ifs well beyond the scope of anything even the other Marvel movies have ever committed to before. This is where we find out what in the beginning means for the origins of, well, everything in terms of all these other films, and it's a weird one. Can't wait to see what all the other characters say when someone explains it to them, and in that context it's also the first Marvel film in forever that you could call definitively more of a talker, where until the big finale the most important and dramatic moments are mostly conveyed by having the main characters talk these things out with one another. Not necessarily in a series of dinner parties, though there's a couple of those, but one can in fact see why it was so important that so much of this get shot on location with physical places and real lighting and atmosphere. So many of the most important and dramatic scenes involve the build-up and exchange of emotionally charged dialogue between characters. You want it to be infused with the energy of a real place and time. Audiences expecting epic battles and larger-than-life spectacle will, certainly, be rewarded with one of the most gigantic in terms of both scale and sheer concept finales I think any Marvel movie has ever attempted, but this is very much a movie that's aiming to have scenes where characters break one another's hearts by turning away, or do the opposite by reappearing, be more devastating and consequential than whatever literal or figurative cosmic scale spectacle Eternals busts out for its grand finish. Whether or not it succeeds every time is another story. Eternals is a, conceptually, huge movie with a huge cast taking a huge swing at huge ideas every time it gets up to bat, and it gets a clear hit, most of the time, I believe. I wouldn't say it misses any of the pitches. I don't necessarily think all of them get over the wall, either, but more than enough of them do, and it's the important ones. The cast, top to bottom, is fantastic. I wish a few had more screen time. By plot necessity the majority of our main storyline screen time runs with Cersei, Sprite, Icarus, and Kingo, with the others splitting time between later scenes and a greater presence in flashbacks, but when everyone is working off one another's energy is a wonderfully balanced group, and despite the mix of familiar and less so faces, even megastars like Jolie eventually slip into being simply their characters. The subtle visualizations for their different traits and abilities are uniquely visualized, which can't be easy given how often we've seen superhuman magical this and that powers on screen at this point. There's a matter-of-factness pervading it all that's very refreshing, particularly in regard to how ordinary the film regards the anything but ordinary, especially for the too safe, too often, for too long Marvel cycle, diversity of characters and personalities that comprise the Eternals themselves. That having been said, when it comes to other areas, in particular the nuts and bolts of its humanity, worth it or no, thoughts, arc of overall philosophical bent, it does feel like there's a few weights left off the bar to get the lift looking more impressive. Not necessarily in a damning way by any means. It probably behooves one to remember that there's a substantial audience that watches Disney and Marvel movies, especially on the younger side, who'll be encountering most of the bigger metaphysical and existential concepts being raised as plot points by Eternals for the very first time and be utterly blown away by them, and it's hard to argue against that as a positive in itself. On the other hand, it's not wrong exactly to wish that there was a bit more actual meat to the deeper questions here, not only because it would help to justify what one imagines some will find the most insurmountable ask the film makes of its audience, holding back on a full explanation for why the Eternals all act like they do until the mid-film here's what's really going on mega spoiler info dump revelations, but because it would make the film's philosophical and pseudoscientific implications at least partly likely to be as much discussed as the post-credits appearances of some extremely complicated / obscure characters and sundry totems from the comics will inevitably be. Yet, even still, while perhaps not in exactly the shape or form some had imagined, Eternals really is the big, bold, bizarre, hard to believe a major studio signed off on this blockbuster that people said Marvel didn't have in them. Whether the world rewards them for it or not is yet to be seen, but I'm recommending that you find out for yourself. This film, directed by Chloé Zhao, screenplay by Chloé Zhao, story by Ryan Firpo, based on Eternals, produced by Kevin Feige, starring Gemma Chan, cinematography Ben Davis, edited by Craig Wood, music by Ramin Djawadi, production company Marvel Studios, distributed by Walt Disney Studios, release dates October 18, 2021 states, running time 156 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $236.2 million, box office $402.1 million.